Evin McMullen. Your DID Chief Tech Advisory at Nft3. We're going to get into DIDs a lot, but I first want to look into a little bit of your background. You've done a lot of things over nearly a decade. I've heard it phrased like the most macro perspective that, more than most people have. And I would love to sort of hear some of that story. Of course, what I first found out about was your work at Serto, at ConsenSys Mesh. Hopefully, we can dive into that a little bit. I know that has to do with DIDs pretty directly. But yeah, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Well, a little bit about me. I have been long fascinated with the experience of how people interact in digital spaces. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, so the heyday of the social web, from instant messengers and emails to persistent social platforms and then persistent digital environments and connected technology that, came into places like our homes and our schools. And so for me, my formative years were spent largely in digital space. And so when I went to school, I was really excited about learning what additional capabilities were possible with leading edge technology that was emerging. Throughout my career, my focus, though varied in its perspective, has consistently stayed at the intersection between new technologies and consumer experience. And that has taken me everywhere from music videos and film production to, supporting large organizations in their R&D efforts, to autonomous vehicles, insurance in Berkshire Hathaway, and then back to sort of the home-based mental space that is client-side data. So sort of recreationally and personally, I've been enthusiastic about decentralized technologies and blockchains since about 2011, 2012. But over the past about 4 years, have spent my full-time work focused at ConsenSys, which is a decentralized technology venture studio and Ethereum-based ecosystem that is sort of emotionally anchored in New York City. And so I've worked with global teams for the past few years exploring what it means to have true ownership and control of data outside of an ecosystem of centralized data silos and surveillance capitalism. I know that sounds a little punk rock. I promise it's a little bit more enterprise friendly than that. But my interest in all of this really came from way back when, learning about the free and open source software community, about GNU Linux licenses, about the MIT license, Creative Commons, and the types of wrappers and external exercises that creative folks were doing to bring more utility to data and to solve the bottlenecks of economic control and of utility that we experience with a server-based permissioned world that is largely controlled by enterprises that are providing experiences for us to generate data inside of. And so I'm particularly enthused about the Web3 sort of decentralized tech space because it is applying a lot of these principles in a very practical way and posing the question, what if human beings were the transport and control layer for their own data? And so opening up the world of possibility, not only for the sovereignty of the individual, but also for the new business capabilities and the new operational capabilities, computation capabilities that we can enjoy everywhere from the medical and health space to education, to parties, to food safety, and kind of everything in between. Any data set that requires a greater level of trust and transparency and needs to be accessed by multiple different parties, that sort of whole swath of the world is about to be introduced to a new set of tools.
Yeah, that's actually, wow. The last thing you said, is precisely how I view it as well, is that with Web 3.0, what we're essentially doing is, here is this new solution set. And now we can kind of work backwards and go, hey, this problem that you think is unsolvable is not actually very unsolvable anymore, right? And so on and so forth. And I feel like the ramifications of it, well, like you said, it's not just art, it's not just commerce, but I would venture to say democracy itself, can now be executed in a way that really has been largely theoretical for pretty much all time, right? Unless you're talking about a very small geography, which basically is never the case, right? I also really loved that idea, punk rock plus enterprise. I think that's pretty close to the spirit of Web 3.0, don't you think? It's like we've kind of hit on something here where it's these two paradoxical sort of perspectives, but I don't think any project that's worth mentioning, loses that artistic sort of the thing that they started with. But all of the ones that are making it are actually being able to bridge it into some sort of commercial aptitude. That's I think ConsenSys is an amazing example, actually, right? You're shaping culture from a very central place. So it's almost like a nearly invisible, like, okay, maybe that's not the thing that first comes to mind to people, but yeah, it's fab to hear about, man. Tell me more about your journey into DIDs. Where did that first begin? How deep exactly are you in that rabbit hole? I would venture to say probably further along than most people on Earth. But yeah, please do introduce us. What are DIDs or DIDs? How big of a deal are they exactly?
Oh, I am the rabbit hole. So come on, everybody, come on down. So when we think about identity, sort of what that is, what that means to us in our lived experience. Usually we think of our passport, maybe a driver's license, a state or student ID or employee ID. And then in the digital space, you might feel like your social accounts, a Twitter account, Instagram account, TikTok account is representative of you. And when you choose that username, or you get a phone number, or you receive an identity card, what you're really receiving is not an identity, but it's an identifier. It's a name that can be associated with you, your person. But for me, identity is not a string. It's not a name. It's a name plus some information about that name, all the data related to that name, plus proof that you can control both of those things. And for me, identity is a kind of a fuzzy set of capabilities, of privileges and identifiers and associated data that you can exercise control over. But in the Web3 ecosystem, often identity gets conflated with identifiers. So you'll often hear folks saying, my Bitcoin address is my new identity. Nah, homie, it is yet another public identifier. It becomes an identity, part of your identity, when you exercise control over a public identifier, Twitter account, Ethereum or Polkadot address, email address, et cetera. And then you start performing actions with or collecting data around that identifier. So the emails or tweets that you send and receive, the transactions that you send and receive on a network, and then your ability to control both of those things sort of subsumes it into your composite identity. That is your person, your existence, and your presence. And so the identifiers that we have in the blockchain world, in the Web3 world, are public, necessarily public addresses. So for example, my public Ethereum address, it's going to come with a set of private signing keys that allow me to control it. But that public address is going to be visible to everybody else. And all of the actions that I do related to that address are going to be visible to everybody else for the most part. So if I'm sending money on a blockchain network, that transaction is going to be public. And so the only information I can learn about you, if I have your blockchain address, if I have your public key, I can learn what's in your wallet, and I can learn your past transaction history. And that can tell me about your wealth. And that's it. That's the tweet. And so if using public addresses only, the only thing we can learn about each other is how much money we have, how much wealth we have. Then if our only signal is wealth, then the only kind of governance structure we can form is a plutocracy. Who has more wealth, who has less wealth, then we vote. This is not a particularly revolutionary or meaningful kind of governance. Indeed, it is, would you want to drive a car that was designed by the richest people in the room or the best engineers in the room?
Right.
And so we need some other kind of identifier, some other kind of way to learn about one another in decentralized space. Because when we eliminate centralized sources of authority, or we diminish their role, we eliminate centralized storage or diminish the role of centralized storage of data, we create a discoverability problem. How do we find each other in this decentralized world? And we also, because we're not looking to a centralized source of truth, how do we, on the client side, hanging out by our bad selves, how do we get really good at telling truth from fiction? And so we need some way to collect data about ourselves that can be stored in a form that can be trusted, can be verified, with the same kind of, or a similar kind of confidence as the confidence that we have in blockchain networks. So we need super strong, super robust way to trust data, but that data doesn't necessarily live on a blockchain in the same way that our blockchain identifiers and that wealth data is so readily accessible. We are human beings, and so therefore we need a way to collect data about ourselves that is flexible, that can change and evolve just like we do. So for example, when you were younger, your address was probably, your physical address where you live was probably different than where it is now. If you set your address on a blockchain, first of all, you're like publicly doxing yourself, so don't ever do that. But also, that immutable form of information is not the most flexible if you're planning to ever move again in your life. And paying money to update on-chain data about your personal self is not a great idea. That data is going to change. You don't want to dox yourself. And so, maintaining things like your health records, your permission to enter your apartment building, your, your VIP pass at your favorite pizza place, whatever those things are, there is great value in having a little personal data backpack that you can carry around about yourself. You reach in there and you pull out pieces of information that have been given to you by other people, signed pieces of information, whether it's a signed diploma from your university, a signed proof of entry from a house where you're house sitting, whatever these things are. We need the ability to manage data off the blockchain about ourselves in a verifiable form that can be set to revoke or can expire. Because we, in the same way that we need on-chain public immutable data, we also need off-chain private, flexible, revocable data. But we need to be able to trust both kinds of data in the same way. So if we want to have lives that exist beyond plutocracies and that allow us to, gain information about ourselves beyond how much money we have and what stuff we've bought, then we're going to need another form of data to collect that information, to manage it, to throw it in our little off-chain data, personal data backpack, personal data locker. And so this is where decentralized identifiers come in. So a decentralized identifier is a public identifier with a set of signing keys that allows you to write statements about other people, about other companies, about other events or objects. And so like I could make a statement saying, I was introduced to Dylan over Zoom in 2020, signed Evin. And I could give that credential to Dylan, and Dylan could show it off to anybody he wants. And if they trust me, they can verify the signature. It's all sort of a cryptographic proof, presented as a cryptographic proof. If they trust me, they're going to trust what's inside of it. So in the early days of the blockchain space, people were really excited about putting all of our data on chain. So what if we gave NFTs to refugees, and it would give the refugees the ability to go across borders, and they could show everyone their data and everyone would know they're a refugee. But then we remembered that having public databases of ethnic minorities is not a good idea, because the last time previous times that happened, we've ended up with genocide. And so this sort of begs the question, how do we use a new identifier with a set of signing keys that can allow us to say things that can be trusted, but we don't need a blockchain to keep it straight? So the sort of magical set of folks who came to the rescue, the W3C, they're a standard setting body. Now, the last time that these folks came together, they were making decisions around like how many W's go in front of a website. So we can thank the W3C for the www dot in our websites. They also defined HTTPS protocols. So the abilities that we enjoy to safely interact with one another in the Web 2.0 space were defined by the W3C. But these are old school Web 2 folks, which is why it is so shocking and so exciting that they have come together again. They got the band back together. And this time, a couple years ago, they decided we need a new way for identifiers from different universes to talk to each other. How does a Bitcoin address talk to an Ethereum address? How does someone who owns a website use that identity to interact with someone who owns a PGP key? What kinds of communal language can we start to create among all these identifiers so that they can tell each other about the data that they each have and interact in a more connected metaverse? So several years ago, based on a bunch of proprietary research, proprietary and private credential research that was done across the blockchain community and others, they arrived at what's called the decentralized identifier. So as I mentioned, you have an identifier, a string set of letters and numbers, and then you get a set of signing keys associated with that identifier. Now, that sounds a lot like PGP, you might say. I know it does. But the reason that this is different is that PGP is sort of an originally derived public identifier with a set of signing keys. But if you lose those keys, you're kind of out of luck. And so some of the magical things about decentralized identifiers include that you can create a decentralized identifier using another public identifier. So you can start with a website, you can start with a blockchain public address, you could start with any number of other sorts of keys. There are actually 95 different flavors of them.
Yeah, any of the splinters of your overall identity, right? And
exactly. So in the case of NFT3, one of the 95 different DID methods is the Nft Did method. So it allows you to take a public identifier, like the identifier of an NFT or a blockchain address, let's say, my Ethereum public address, and you put it in the namespace of the decentralized identifier. So in the case of the Ethereum decentralized identifier method, my identifier would be DID :ETHR : and then just my Ethereum public key. And I take that new composite string and I derive a new set of keys, and I can rotate those keys if I lose them, or I can give them to someone else if I'm no longer in a position to want to manage that asset or identifier. So now I've got a new identifier built on top of an old identifier with a new set of signing keys. It's kind of like putting an addition onto the house, where you now have an extension of a storage capability and identifier you already had that has a new space to store things, a new way to manage data. I started off with an identifier, I put an addition on the house, I now have the ability to store both on-chain data around that identifier and off-chain data around that identifier. And I got two sets of signing keys, so I can send messages on-chain and I can send messages off-chain. So these signed pieces of data that we're collecting in my new personal data locker, my new personal data backpack, they take the form of another standard defined by the W3C called verifiable credentials, or credentials you can verify. So the way that you verify a verifiable credential, so the credential form, as I mentioned, it's going to be a statement made by my identifier about another identifier, and I'm going to sign it at the bottom. And then it will be presented as a JWT token. And anyone who encounters this credential in the wild can just grab it, throw it into a universal resolver, and it will spit out the contents. Who said what, about whom, when, signed from the issuer. And so what this means is that anyone who can check a signature can check whether or not the credential's been tampered with and who signed it, and whether or not they trust that party. And so this combination of capabilities delivers to us roughly the same level of trust that we can enjoy, often even more context than we can enjoy with blockchain data. So this is a super useful form of data that can include everything from permission to open physical spaces, permission to access digital experiences, just general data about yourself, your achievements, badges, interactions, etc. And so the really exciting, one of the really exciting things about this pair of primitives, so decentralized identifiers and the verifiable credentials that describe them, is that these standards, as I mentioned, there's about 95 different versions, and they can all talk to each other. So the way that you write a credential to describe a person is the same way that you write a credential to describe an NFT, is the same way you can write a credential to describe a dog, a Bitcoin address, a Polkadot address,
Yeah.
a car. And so anyone who's messing around in this form of data ecosystem is suddenly able to read data that has interacted with objects that are totally out of their solar system. And so this kind of linkages, bidirectional linkages that show ownership of identifiers on multiple platforms allows for us to carry our data and reputation from one context to another. So part of the reason that it's so important to have off-chain data in Web3 is that, as we talked about, the only data that you can get is your financial data. And so if you're trying to perform, a job for a community, you're trying to represent yourself in a digital space, it's really hard to signal anything other than your wealth. But if you have the ability to signal, like, I've been part of 3 startups before, I went to university, I've written this book, I have spoken at this conference, being able to provide proofs of those things suddenly makes it much easier for another organization or another party to recognize you and determine, whether you're a member of their tribe. So this kind of trustless, verifiable off-chain data is the basis of how we build the blockchain ecosystem beyond pure financial capabilities, in a way that preserves everyone's privacy and doesn't force public self-doxing because we don't have anywhere else to store our data.
I think from sort of like a philosophical standpoint, it can also be. I love the differentiation between identifier and identity that you made, right? That's, I think, basically the crux of the problem, even before Web 3.0, but yeah, certainly, especially in Web 3.0, is that you have these splinters of activity on different platforms, right? And so if you take the status of Web 3.0 right now, you've added anonymity, so you now just have addresses. So it's even worse than before, right? Earlier, say, for example, for your professional stuff, you could point to a LinkedIn. Again, of course, that data was all in the control of LinkedIn and being monetized by LinkedIn. So those are two very, very different things, right? But now in the Web 3.0 world, we've improved on those, let us say, or at least we believe, right, in this world. But now they become nearly invisible splinters. So not only are they splinters of your identity, they're also kind of just swimming out there, right? So the way I personally look at what the problem is and what the solution might be something like is I got to put all of these together, but like you said, not dox myself and have it be in my control where I reveal what and to whom. And then, of course, the dream of all of this is if I can somehow take the monetary value that was being generated and will be generated, obviously data is everything, right? If I can put that back into the hands of the individual, at least partly, hopefully a lot more than that, right? Then now we really are looking at something that's special. And I feel like the other thing that's very interesting about, I mean, of course, I'm a little biased, but our solution is that, so DIDs, the way I understand them effectively, it's the common language, And obviously, that's the most critical part of the problem is that, like you said, these splinters, they got to be able to talk to each other so that they can identify each other. And then sort of you can start, making a cumulative unit out of it, hopefully in your control. But so that's the common language. I look at it like the infinitely flexible piece. But now you also need like a rock. And that's, I feel like, where the NFT comes in. And obviously also as an adoptive vehicle, which we can get into in a little bit. But, I feel that's what's very unique about the way we've combined these two things is that without the rock, you're just swimming, In fact, I would love to get into that. So DID's been around for a little while. A couple of projects have been trying to do things. Obviously, the common protocol now exists, and it's a very big deal. But we haven't really seen what we might have hoped for, right? Why do you think that is? What do you think would sort it? What do you think are the odds that we can do it, for example, with this attempt that we're making? Obviously, this is a very massive problem, and it's not something that I feel like one project can just solve it, Of course, it's just one of many attempts. But what do you think about the attempts that have been made so far? What do you think differentiates Nft3 a little bit?
So I would say maybe it's a little premature for us to experience any kind of disappointment. Like, the ink is not yet dry on these standards. It's been less than 2 years since these things were invented. So like, we'll give ourselves a minute here. But
Yeah.
that said, right now we are trying to retroactively introduce a language of interoperable identifiers to a series of networks and existing communities that already have their own identifiers that don't do most of what
Yeah.
they can
You
do.
make a great point. You make a great point. Yeah.
And so, in the case of a lot of blockchain ecosystems, I feel like, sometimes Ethereum is like the protocol that identity forgot. That having a global settlement layer that does more than financial settlement necessarily must have more than financial data, which comes as a shock to many, a retroactive shock to many. Oh shoot, we forgot it. It's like when Kevin's parents get to the airport and home alone, and whatever, they land, they realize they're on vacation without their kid. That's us in the blockchain world right now. We have left Kevin at the house in New York City or at the airport or whatever. We are out. We are on the plane to Mexico or wherever they're going, and we've realized, oh no, we forgot an identifier layer that
Yeah,
allows us
and
to talk to
also
each other.
we've bet everything we have on this plane, so it's not like we
Exactly.
can
Like,
go
oh shoot.
back. There's like a lot more to this analogy, right?
So I think there are a few reasons that we have not yet seen meaningful liftoff. I think the first is that the first mover advantage of financial identifiers in the blockchain space makes so much money that there really isn't a reason to do anything else right now. Or rather, at first, there was the opportunity to create so much value, novel utility and value with financial identifiers alone, that there was more incentive to work on enjoying the fruits of that possibility than investing in the hypothetical future value of some other identifier. So I think now in the market, we are starting to see the lack of a more interoperable identifier layer providing a bit of a ceiling to the hilarious returns and financial success that can be enjoyed in the blockchain space. And additionally, the pressure of regulatory oversight that frequently asks for things like identifiers such as your name. There isn't tooling that can allow you to submit that in the Web3 space in a way that allows you to preserve your privacy and control and agency over that data. And so they're now, I think, only just in the development of our market are starting to exist both economic and regulatory pressures that would require or benefit from, generate value for users and enterprises if they had a more sophisticated system of identity. And so the early examples, some of the early examples of utilizing this technology were really hard, really hard to use because all we had was a set of single-spaced 10-point font technical standards and nothing to click to get an identifier. Like, the team that I work on with ConsenSys Mesh, Serto, we only just, as of a few weeks ago, created a tool where you can click a button to make a decentralized identifier. Like, this is the first time this has ever happened in the enterprise space. Before then, you were writing lines and lines of code and trying to comb through these standards and figure out what's going on. And so we are only just creating the vending machines of identifiers and trustless data that could allow anyone but a significantly experienced developer to play with this stuff. But one of the great visions that we share is the ability of any person, my mom, to be able to manage and actively participate in the existence of their data. And so what this means in terms of adoption is that identity can help unlock more possibility after you take advantage of whatever's available with the current pieces. And identities can also help you pass the final boss in the regulatory environment in many of these instances. So it's kind of one and the same. Like, there's only so much value you can generate in a closed community with a limited set of information about your counterparties. However, there's a lot of money to be made there. And so we're just now seeing the emergence of enterprises, the community getting pretty good at making a bunch of value with the tools that they have in this limited form today. But because of the growing sophistication of those entities, the growing pressure from the regulatory environment, we're seeing folks start to ponder, what if I could tell whether you're an engineer or a designer, when I interact with your address? What if I could ask you if you're an accredited investor or not? What if I could tell your Uber rating, or whatever traits you might want with this? Because as soon as we interact with the blockchain space, we are totally spoiled. We have a super high level of trust in the data that we get from the blockchain. And then we look around to the rest of the world in that data and we think, oh, this is so much less trustworthy. This is so not verifiable. What are we even doing here? Did you just make that number up? Where'd it come from? Your database? Just writing numbers in a database, sending it out like it's the real thing, no way to verify. What is that? What is that? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so, it's like we're with this new protocol. It's treating us so well. All that data is so verifiable. Anything you could go in the ledger, you could just check it. And then you go back to your Web2 database and it's an Excel spreadsheet. You want to check one of those cells? Good luck. What are you going to do? Call Karen from accounting and ask her how she got it? There's no proof that can help you. And so now that we are realizing, oh my gosh, I wish all my data could be as trustless as blockchain data, and it can. But we need to get better at enabling the issuers of that data, the generators of that data, the oracles producing that input into our Web3 ecosystem, to deliver that data in a form that can be verified, that is, sort of free of tampering, is tamper evident, and encrypted so that we can control it and manage it ourselves. And so I borrowed this line from an old TV show, and it's not particularly eloquent, but like, identity for me, like, and the show is about something else, I forgot, but like, identity isn't the thing. Identity is the thing that gets you to the thing. What does that mean? Identity is the enabling layer that enhances your actions in an environment to allow you to do more sophisticated interactions than you would otherwise.
Another way to sort of look at it, is and I think you brought it together very well. So I'm just going to try and sum that section up. Is that there's a sort of a perfect storm brewing, because again, you're right. Now, a blockchain in our space is sort of feeling the growing pains of, okay, what more can we do here? This is pretty great. A lot of money being made. It's amazing. All-time highs, all of that stuff. That's great. It's cool. But what if I can add more data, and somehow create significantly more value? Or like you said, the regulated, that stuff of, So there is, I think, space in the market now where they're looking for more sophisticated ways of combining identifiers, creating some sort of an identity. Of course, there's no going back from anonymous actions. Like, that's just, done for. So it has to have that inbuilt. But then on the other hand, on the did track of things, like you said, it's finally beginning to become somewhat accessible, right? And I mean, you're at the forefront of that. And what we're going to try and do at Nft3 is basically take that forward. But I feel like these two things coming together, roughly speaking, at this time could be really something special, So I'm going to segue into my next question with this, is where do you see the next 2 odd years? 2 years is a long time in blockchain, right? But if you could sort of like, so obviously on the data track, things become more and more and more accessible. Hopefully I can do everything off of a phone. Like, that's how I always analogize Nft3, by the way. It's like, it's just Face ID. I just wanted, like, it should be that simple for me to get into my identity and then do the things that I need to do. So obviously that's a bit of a, it's a long journey to take. But where do you see the next 2 years going, and what more can somebody do here to make sure that the value generated is like maximized and captured by the right people too, right? That's a big part of the problem as well, right?
So my goal in the next 2 years, maybe 2 is a little quick, but we'll try with 2, is I never want to fill out a form again. I want to rock up with my data.
You should run with that. I would vote. You know how much I hate for God. Oh, you really hit a nerve here.
So we are just now, as in this sort of pivotal moment of evolution in the business and data ecosystem. And being able to show up to an app and present your own data, open up your wallet, show them what's inside, and have that app interact in a specific way accordingly. Our whole life can now become a token permissioned adventure where we can, go through our days gaining access and permission to different experiences, whether it's at the doctor's office, what is your phone number and where do you live and your insurance information, or at a bar, are you over the age of 21 and permitted to come in here? And so what we as end users are going to need, and this kind of gets into adoption, is something that we can put in our pocket, in our hand, in our purse, that allows us to interface with all that data about ourselves that we are trying to selectively disclose to the parties that are asking for it. Now, in the traditional blockchain space, we're starting to get pretty good at that. So in my own personal practice, I'll go home and, go to a website and be able to connect my MetaMask wallet in one click to be able to access token gated content. To just yesterday, I was able to get tickets for a party because I owned a certain NFT. So I had to connect my wallet into the ticketing website. It checked for my NFT and was able to provide a ticket of admission for me. So we're only starting to be able to present our on-chain data in order to receive special experiences in the rest of the world. What NFT3 is swinging for, that I'm very excited about, and what we need in the next 2 years, is the ability to present off-chain data about ourselves in the same way we present that on-chain data in the form of NFTs to ticketing websites, so that our off-chain data about ourselves, our personal data, can inform the kind of experience that we enjoy. So what do we need in order for that to happen? We need a wallet overhaul. So right now, Web3 wallets are kind of like Periscope, like, those things you like whale watchers used to use. You stand on the deck of your ship and you kind of look off into the distance and say, ahoy there, that's where I see this thing. And then you report back to the rest of the guys on your ship like, oh, there's a whale over there. Cool. We're all on the same page. We have consensus. There is a whale, this endpoint.
Love that in this analogy, even whales. I mean, damn, your analogy game is amazing.
And so I do a lot of teaching, so I try to make it really tangible. So that's what I think about, like my MetaMask wallet. Most crypto wallets right now, Phantom on Solana, whatever, what they are doing, those wallets do not have a lot of local storage. In fact, the ones that are little browsers extensions, they have like a teeny amount of storage, right? All they're doing is they're looking through that scope, and they are reporting the transactions that exist on the blockchain that are associated with your public address. So that's great. On-chain data, all you need really is a set of binoculars that let you check out the ledger, and then you can report back in the interface as to what those interactions are and kind of how they're going. But the problem is that off-chain data cannot be managed in that manner. Off-chain data is like a bank vault. It has to sit somewhere because it's full of pieces of data that are off the chain, which means they are signed JSON blobs. They are files, like the files that we download when we download a PDF, which means that we need a big storage container to put all our files in. And, it's like our personal data backpack, our personal data locker. But, at some point, those files, if we're collecting a lot of data about ourselves, those files are going to get too big for a backpack. We're going to need our personal data locker, personal bank vault. So the requirements of these wallets are very different. So, in a Web3 token wallet that's a browser extension like MetaMask, for example, that handles only on-chain data, that's a pretty small amount of storage that it requires to do an awesome job, to be able to relay that information in the UI back to you as the user. Whereas a wallet that manages off-chain data, so several years ago, a preceding project that sort of led the way before mine called UPort allowed you to have a mobile wallet on your phone where you would store all of your credentials in the same way that, like, for example, Apple users today have the Apple Wallet that allows you to hold things like plane tickets and event tickets, et cetera. But all of those things are files, so they got to go in the vault. and the vault's really big, and the vault's really heavy, and the vault's got to live somewhere. And so I think it's really exciting to think about how we can use flexible storage solutions for that data so that users can retrieve it any old time. It doesn't necessarily have to live forever on a single device, because what if you lose the device? That's not great. And it can be stored in a way that is private and can only be selectively disclosed by you as the user. And so what I think is really exciting here is that NFT3 looks at these two kinds of wallets, these two kinds of experiences of identity. One that is collecting, and holding yourself, and the other that is, looking out into the sky and seeing those things written about yourself and then returning back to you. And the way forward that NFT is defining is saying, why not both, Zoidberg? Like, we can have it all. So an NFT can sit in your Web3 wallet today that's token enabled. And you can then use the existing wallets that people already own to hold and obtain something like an NFT3. And so NFT3 is using the client-side infrastructure, the wallet infrastructure that already exists, and the mental model that people already have of what NFTs are and what kinds of assets and information they represent. And it extends those possibilities by throwing that decentralized identifier addition on the house, addition on the NFT, extending the NFT's capabilities beyond what is initially possible with that single interface in a simple NFT form. And usually when you include data in an NFT, you literally put it like inside the NFT. So there's a URI pointing to centralized data stored elsewhere. But instead of putting the data inside the NFT3 is affixing an addition on top of the NFT, using an external framework to define then another separate storage solution outside the NFT that can hang on to all that data and can be controlled in the same way that, like, if I had a storage unit, I could go in there and I could pick out which item I wanted to pull out and show people, and I could put it back inside. And NFT3 allows for NFTs to offer a similar level of oversight. Now, we're continuing to develop right now what that storage solution looks like, although we've got a lot of really exciting ideas. What that selective disclosure layer of, being able to share certain parts of your data looks like. But in the near term, I think it's really exciting to see a project like NFT3 utilize the existing onboarding flow and user awareness of public assets like NFTs and combine them with the technical standards and superior privacy and security of decentralized identifier methods. And to my knowledge, I think y'all are certainly the first in this field to be using the Nft Did method, maybe the first in production. I'm not sure, but it's supremely early. The ink on the standards is not yet dry even, but experiments like this are needed to prove out these possibilities because, as we were talking about earlier, the economic incentive to forge into this territory has a lot of enterprises too scared to try.
I think this has just been just I would pay for this lecture if I had to go somewhere.
You are so generous. Oh my gosh. I'll talk to you about this stuff all day, man. Literally, I talk about this stuff at parties. I promise. Like, actually, I'm wearing a Coachella t-shirt right now. Back in the day, like years and years ago, I would bring around crypto, like temporary tattoos, and put them on people at Coachella. Be like, you don't need him. Leave him. Buy your own VIP tickets. Buy crypto. But no, like, all jokes aside, I think we need to remember that at the end of the day, blockchains, decentralized technology, DIDs, NFTs, all they are is intermediary rails to help us as people do the same kind of stuff we've always been doing, talking to each other, buying things from each other, coordinating with each other, solving problems with each other. And so we have a new public identifier, but we're not like forging out into space to do something totally unrelated to the rest of the world. We are merely tacking on another public identifier to enrich the identities that we already have. But fortunately, this new identifier, our Nft3, has so many more capabilities that unlock the power of us to use the data associated with our identities in a way that serves us. So mirroring the kind of value extraction that folks like Facebook and Google and Netflix and the FANG ecosystem have enjoyed for many years, it is time for us to be given, an in to enjoy the work product of our data that is enriching so many others already.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really quite a tipping point, not just culturally, but also within Web 3.0. The market requires something like this, further sophistication, and then at the same time, I feel like culturally, the identity. That's funny that I say that. The identity that Web 3.0 itself has, right, is ultimately about empowering the individual, but in a way that does not take power away from somebody else, right? I think that's a very critical piece of the mindset that all of us share in this space. And so something like this is about ultimate sovereignty, and in a way that really wasn't even, you couldn't even really visualize it beforehand, right? So uh, it's really exciting to think about how early we are in this, and it's scary to be one of the first ones doing this, perhaps the first ones doing this. But I do feel very, very confident that we have advisors such as you, and I spoke to Ben a little while ago. My perspective obviously is very, very cultural and sort of marketing oriented, so I can see that, well, one angle that I love looking at, right, is that utilizing NFTs, even though that on the tech end it makes a lot of sense to use them, and that's fabulous, but even just as an adoptive vehicle, just that part can really be a moat for a project trying to make dates the thing, because we already have so much crazy momentum about NFTs. People are already self-identifying with them, self-expressing with them, and they want these metaverses that are forming. They want more functionality to their NFTs, and also to be able to take them across metaverses, right? That's a problem that right now nobody really has a solution to. So I feel like we're really at the cusp of something, amazing here. So yeah, mad excited. I had planned for this to be a 30-minute session so that it would be nice and breezy for everybody in our community to watch. I think we have blown that time out of the water. So I think we're gonna no, I think we're gonna have to do a did series. That's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna call them the Evin lectures, and and they're gonna be a
Come
gated
on,
experience.
we've got to do something better. That's no fun. I feel we'll work on this. Maybe we call it identity party. I don't know. We'll figure it
All
out.
right, sure. Identity Coachella if you want.
Yeah, all
It's
right.
really up to
Identity
your
happy
party, man.
hour. We'll figure something out. But I'm happy to talk through and to that end, there are a few facets of DIDs that I think would be worth touching on in that ecosystem. I'm just going to kind of list about because I know we're kind of chilling at this point. But
Right.
what is a DID? Just in a very fundamental term. How do DIDs interact with each other? What happens when you put a DID on an NFT? Because that's its own, of course, NFT3 is one phenomenal use case, but just understanding the fact that the two can live harmoniously means that you can have so you were talking, a lot about how people want their NFTs to do more. And right now, NFTs are literally not built to do more. They are built to do nothing. They have this much storage space inside of them. NFTs are built to incite events that are interestingly built elsewhere. But with DIDs, you can then make the NFT the thing itself. You can make the NFT the transport layer for its own data. So you can imagine NFT to NFT messaging. So messages sent directly from one Bored Ape to another with no intermediary. Or NFTs that are able to collect data about where they've been displayed and exhibited in the metaverse, in museums, in print, in wearables, wherever. And so the ability to have rich contextual data around the object itself means that we now have the ability to define provenance for anything, whether it's a table, piece of art, a purse, a person, a car, an airplane, etc.
Yeah.
I think it'll start to get really interesting, when like perhaps in the enterprise future, maybe vehicles will have NFT3s that collect the data about them regarding their repair history and their sales history. There are a variety of ways, whether they're, objects or individuals, for us to combine data that's appropriate for the blockchain that needs to be globally available and needs that sort of level of global settlement layer. But anything that needs that kind of data probably could also benefit from a more flexible, mutable kind of data as well. And it's any instance that demands both that I
That's
think
where we come in.
exactly that's the sweet
Yeah.
spot. It's calling your name.
Yeah.